Good afternoon, everyone. It's common at a Jewish funeral to begin by reciting different phrases, ideas from the Book of Psalms. When we are grieving, sometimes there's an opportunity to borrow from the words, from the wisdom of the Psalms. And so I'm going to just sing something that might be known to many of you. We'll start with that first. Me'ayin yavo hezri Esaina yehel heharim Me'ayin yavo hezri me'im Adonai Hoseh Shamayim v'haaretz Ezri me'im Adonai Hoseh Shamayim v'haaretz. This is Psalm 103. Ki rachem al banim rachem Adonai yireav ki hu yada yitzreinu zachor ki afar anachnu enosh kechatzir yamav ketzitz hatzadeken yatzitz ki ruach avravo v'nenu lo v'lo yakirenu od mikomo v'chesed Adonai me'olam ve'ad olam al yireav As a father has compassion for his children, Adonai has compassion for those who show reverence. God knows how we are fashioned. God remembers that we are dust. The days of mortals are like grass. We flourish as the flowers of the field. A wind passes over them, and they are no more. And no one can recognize where they grew. But Adonai's compassion is everlasting. God's kindness to children's children, to all the reverent ones, endures age after age, unchanging. We're here today to pay our tribute of affection, respect, and our love to Fred, or many of you knew him as Freddie, Solomon, whose name in Hebrew is Ephraim ben Moshe Vereza Eta. And Fred was born in Romania on November 2nd, 1930. He left this world on May 31st, which corresponds to the 11th of Sivan. He was preceded in passing by his best friend, his wife, 59 years, Malka, by his parents Mishu and Rosa, his brother Ricky, and his son-in-law Carrie. I want to offer condolences to the family, first to his children, to his daughter Leora, to his other daughter Ruth and her husband Perry Kimmelman, to his grandchildren, to Maddie or Madison, to Elliot and Ari, and to his in-laws, Rika Solomon, his sister-in-law, as well as his sister-in-law and brother-in-law, Tamiri and Moti Rotem. One of the questions that comes up in our tradition is, what are we doing when we offer a hesped, a eulogy? And in the Gemara and the Talmud, in Masechet Sanhedrin, it poses the question whether a hesped, a eulogy, is yekara deshavche, for the honor of the departed, or Yekara Dechaye, for the honor of the living. And the question itself, as well as the give and take of the discussion in the Gemara in reaching an answer, leaves the clear impression that a hesped has dual aspects. It is something for both the living and the departed. So at this time, I'd like to call first on Fred's daughters, Leora and Ruth, to say some words about their dad, and then to call on his greatest treasures, maybe even more precious than a corned beef sandwich, his grandchildren, Maddie, Elliot, and Ari. But first, his daughters.
In the last couple of days, many stories and anecdotes of our dad have been shared by family and friends. It occurred to us that it wasn't just that after 92 and a half years of living, there was a lot of material to draw from, but more so that Dad had left an indelible impression. In his quiet, unassuming way, he touched a lot of people, and let's face it, he was a character. Everyone knew Freddie. But beyond being a unique character, our dad was wonderfully loving and devoted, generous to a fault, possessed a work ethic second to none, was a true mensch, and did things his way, full stop. To many in this room, you knew our dad as the face behind Simon's Deli, the family business which included our mom and grandparents and became a North End institution known for its sandwiches, soups, and traditional Jewish fare. People would come from near and far for the kishka, knishes, blintzes, or chopped liver. And for almost 40 years, Passover Seder and Rosh Hashanah tables all over Winnipeg included Simon's famous gefilte fish. Running Simon's wasn't easy and involved long hours, but hard work was something Dad never shied away from. He aimed to provide the best food for his customers, and his many years in the kitchen stirring the soup until it was just right, or behind the counter meticulously slicing deli meats was something he enjoyed and took great pride in. He hated to disappoint his customers. There were many times when at the end of a long day, his slicing machines cleaned, stoves turned off, and front door locked, he would sit at one of the counter stools to do his paperwork. Someone would see him through the window and tap on the glass. Even though he was closed, Dad would unlock the door, let the person in, and make sure they got whatever they had come for. Preparing and selling food may have been Dad's livelihood, but it was much more than that. Food was a passion. Nothing gave Dad more pleasure than sitting down to a good, freshly cooked, freezer is a dirty word in our family, meal with family or friends. But Dad had standards. Not only did everything have to be fresh and the best quality, there was no using low-fat products, artificial sweeteners, or God forbid, margarine. It was 14% sour cream, butter, and lots of oil all the way. It was never too early in the day for some good strong garlic, and when you think you've added enough salt or pepper, just add a little bit more for good measure. The highest praise from Dad upon tasting anything was not bad. Meanwhile, his plate was licked clean and he didn't turn down seconds. But perhaps nothing illustrates more clearly the importance of food in our dad's life than the special Hawaii suitcase. Each year, when our parents would pack up to spend the winter in Hawaii, a special suitcase was filled with the following essential staples: several briskets and salamis, various cheeses, olives, and spices, to name a few, all specially cryovac for the long journey and also to pass customs. Much of this food was used for the events of our dad would host for the staff at their condo building. Our parents were undoubtedly responsible for introducing many a Hawaiian local to a proper corned beef sandwich, but it was the cheese blintzes that proved to be the most popular request each year.
Our parents were lucky enough to share over 59 years together. They were pretty much inseparable because, of course, they worked side by side for almost 40 of those years. Dad loved Mom with all his heart and missed her terribly when she died 6 years ago. Every morning, before heading downstairs from his bedroom to start his day, he would pass a photo of my mom of our mom on their dresser and give her a kiss. He would say, "She was my everything." Of course, it wasn't always lovey-dovey between them. They were known to bicker back and forth quite a bit, especially at the deli over the years. They may have been true partners in almost everything, but they had very different styles and approaches to getting things done. A good friend sent me a text a couple of days ago telling me he had fond memories of his lunches at Simon's where he was entertained by my parents' banter. He said it was funnier than George Costanza's parents on Seinfeld. Well, we'd like to think that our parents are reunited and happily sparring with one another once more and entertaining a new audience. While it is his culinary skills he is best known for, Dad had many other talents. For example, he was very handy and could fix just about anything. His garage and basement are filled with a treasured trove of tools of every description. He loved to do everything around the house by himself and never let his age interfere with that. Well into his 80s, our dad would be spotted by friends on his roof or on a ladder cleaning windows and gutters on his second story. I would regularly get distress calls asking, "Do you know where your dad is?" He would take appliances apart, repair them and reassemble them, only to discover a few leftover screws. Dad would just shrug and say, "They're not necessary." Now, on those rare occasions when Dad did have to hire someone or one of us needed some work done, we could always count on Dad to pipe in, "Don't worry, I've got a guy." Dad was also a master negotiator. He is the only person we know that could barter at a department store, get a quick medical appointment with the promise of corned beef sandwiches and pickles, or get all sorts of banking fees waived in exchange for macadamia nut chocolates from Hawaii. Most of all, Dad was incredibly dedicated to our family. It was his life's mission to take care of us. Despite working very long hours, he always made time and was there for us. We rarely heard the word no or I can't. He always took great pride in our achievements, and he deeply enjoyed being a Zeta. He taught us all many important lessons and led by example. When it came to his grandchildren in particular, the sky was the limit. Everything he did in his life, he did for his family. In more recent years, slowing down a little, Dad always remained positive and was incredibly good-natured and easygoing. The one thing he insisted upon was remaining in his own home. Even though we tried to encourage him to consider a move to the Shaftesbury, where we were sure he would enjoy lots of social interaction with many people he knew, his standard reply was, "You go there, and I'll come visit you." When it became apparent that Dad required more assistance at home, he was blessed to have had many wonderful caregivers. Dad's very first caregiver, Lynn, was with him almost every day for 6 years. "Lynn, where are you? You treated our father as your own, and we know how much you loved him. Your dedication was truly special. In 6 years, you never missed a day once. We were very lucky to have you by Dad's side." To the rest of Dad's dream team, Alicia, Emily, Evelyn, Pressy, Queenie, Rosanna, and Safi, the respect, caring, and kindness you showed Dad is so greatly appreciated. You made it possible for Dad to be where he wanted to be, and we thank you all from the bottom of our hearts. Dad's younger brother, our late Uncle Ricky, always used to say they broke the mold when they made frites. He wasn't wrong, and how lucky for us to have been beneficiaries of this kind, sweet, generous, and yes, unique man who loved us so much. Dad, we love you right back, and we'll miss you every day, but we are so grateful to have the memories of so many wonderful, wonderful years spent together.
Thank you all for coming today to honor and remember our Zeta. While Simon's Deli, in many ways, is our Zeta Frietz's claim to fame, to us, he was so much more. Our Zeta was a man who embodied love, energy, and an extraordinary zest for life. He was unapologetically his authentic self. Zeta was the patriarch of our family, the man at the head of the table, who observed his family with a quiet but deep sense of pride. Above everything, he loved having us all together. Our Zeta was a devoted, loving, and generous grandfather. Ari was his Ari boy, Elliot was his Ellie, and I was his Babalutza. No matter the time of day, we could stop by the house for a visit. He took a keen interest in knowing what we were up to and always attended our school events, recitals, and graduations. Each one of us has memories of waking up on weekends after a sleepover to the smell of Zeta's famous bacon and egg breakfasts. We were also very lucky to have had many trips to Hawaii to visit our Baba and Zeta. We could walk down the hall to his room, and the first question was always, "What can I make you?" Another cherished memory we have of our Zeta is spending afternoons on the beach in Hawaii, usually watching in awe the way that he rocked a Speedo in his signature hands-on-hip position, or wondering when he would finish his seemingly endless swimming laps. Over the last few years, our Zeta's motto was, "Que sera, sera," whatever will be, will be. He always had that easygoing attitude. There was nothing that life threw at him or any of us that could not be figured out. He taught us how to go with the flow and not sweat the small stuff. If you called him recently and asked how he was, it was always, I can't complain. We can't remember our Zeta without taking a moment to talk about our Baba Malka. Our Zeta loved our Baba very much. She really was his queen. Their love was rare and special. It was a one-of-a-kind love. Their relationship and commitment to one another is something that serves as a true inspiration to all three of us. If it wasn't abundantly clear already, our Zeta Frietz lived to eat. Food was his love language, and cooking was his passion. Not only did he set up a second kitchen in the basement with that old stove and meat slicer from Simon's after he, quote, retired, he was also a barbecue master. He was grilling mitite, the Romanian version of a hamburger, like no one else. On hamburgers, our Zeta had a very clear philosophy. His were not only the best, but they were also the only ones that we could eat. Under no circumstance were we allowed to eat a hamburger at any restaurant, especially McDonald's, but we can't confirm or deny if we strictly hold this conviction. It was a resounding no to Coca-Cola. It's actually poison, if you didn't know. It was a resounding yes to Häagen-Dazs ice cream, but only strawberry. And you could always count on there to be a pint or two in the freezer. While many of us here know and loved his signature Jewish delicacies, a lesser-known talent of our Zetas was his unique musicality. Ari has fond memories of our family's Passover Seders, recalling Zeta using his signature tune, which was really just the exact same tune for every song and blessing. While holidays will never be the same without our Zeta's presence at the head of the table, we will continue to sing his tune. From a young age, we always saw our Zeta pushing himself to the limits. Not only did he instill a strong work ethic in us, he also demonstrated serious physical strength and perseverance. In Hawaii, Elliot and Ari remember walking into the scorching hot sauna only to find Zeta on the floor doing push-ups, which was pretty impressive for a man in his 70s. But before Elliot and Ari came along, I was the only grandchild, and I had Zeta Frietz all to myself. I remember spending afternoons at Simon's, where my Zeta would sometimes let me cash out the customers and sneak me a coffee crisp or a sesame snap. His love of cooking and obsession with food definitely rubbed off on me, and it inspired me to learn how to make some of his favorites. I had the privilege of spending time in the kitchen with my Zeta Frites on many occasions. He taught me to make his famous veggie soup, gefilte fish, and chopped liver, although I'm still trying to figure out the equivalent to that large silver bowl or a little bit of salt. I remember making blintzes, Veronica's, and Mama Liga, and let me tell you that my Zeta's patience to stir, cut, fold, and scoop was unmatched. My Zeta always had a good sense of humor, and we often enjoyed a good banter. Specifically, he was not a fan of my nose ring or my political leanings. He playfully called me his little comunista. Recently, whenever I would get ready to leave his house after a visit or end one of our FaceTime calls, I would say, "I love you," and he would respond, "I love you," sometimes. And although his memory had declined during the last few years, he always remembered that I was living in Toronto, and when I would ask him, "Zeta, do you remember what I do for a living?" he would always say, "You're a liar, I mean lawyer," and let out a very hearty laugh. We are very lucky to have so many wonderful memories with our Zeta Frites, and his legacy will help to guide us in the future. Zeta, we love you always.
Before I add just a little bit more to what's already been said, I want to offer condolences for my father, from Rabbi Neil Rose. And when I mentioned that your dad had passed, he said, that was a really wonderful person, and expressed what a loss it is for the community. We wonder sometimes how is it possible for people to be so resilient? You've heard that Freddie, Fritz, I want to get all the right names, how he was steadfast about things he did. And I'm not a psychologist, but I think something about who he was, his disposition, clearly was impacted in the early years of his life. And just to give you a little sense of who he was, in case you haven't heard this was a man who grew up in Romania at a terrible time in Europe. And at close to the age of 20, on his own, he immigrated to Israel. And when we talk about making aliyah, these days it's very comfortable. You get on a plane and you go. This man went on a boat and lived through some very difficult experiences. Moreover, when he arrived in Haifa, recall that in the early 50s, Haifa was not the place that it is now, and he needed a place to sleep. And so what did he do? He slept on sacks of flour or other grains on boats where he was permitted to do. I think he was permitted. But he managed to do that. We who live in this day and age have no concept of what it is to really struggle the way that our grandparents did. After that, Fred joined the IDF and worked as a tool and die maker. And I hope you'll give me permission to tell the story of how your parents met. In his 20s, his aunt and uncle from Canada came to visit. If you don't know this story, this is so precious. And they came to visit him in Israel, and they were driving around, and they were really like second parents to Fred. And they came to cheer him up. And the long story short is, while driving on the highway one day, Near Haifa, they picked up a beautiful, slender Israeli soldier who needed a ride. Can you guess who that was? Before she was dropped off, his aunt, who did all of the talking, I'm told, found out that she was from Romania and that they happened to know many people in common. And then his aunt decided to fix the two of them up, and they went on their date, and 3 weeks later, they were married. 3 months later, 3 weeks later, they were engaged, and 3 months later, they were married. Leora was born a year later in Israel, and then they immigrated to Canada, not here in Winnipeg, but first in Edmonton, if I'm correct, in 1961, and Ruth was born. And Fred continued to work as a tool and die maker for a while, and then a cousin who had moved to Winnipeg said, I think this is the place that you need to come and run. And sure enough, he did so for almost 40 years, first with his parents and, of course, with Malka, his wife. And in the beginning, they couldn't afford to change the name on the sign. And eventually, everyone came to know the place as Simon, so it stuck. As Perry shared with me, Freddie's expression of love was his work so that he could support his family. And despite working really long days, while his parents were still around, he still made a point of seeing them every day at the Sharon home just down the street from here. That was the sort of person he was. And you've heard about his incredible skills as a barterer. Fred was also incredibly proud of his Jewish identity. And he led seders, he led all sorts of holiday festivities for his family. I'm going to conclude, but I want to say, as I've mentioned to the family, it's impossible to encapsulate the life of somebody who lived for 92 years and the way he lived his life in just a brief amount of time. So I hope what you'll do is continue to tell his stories. When someone dear to us is taken, we inevitably begin to question our own mortality and our very existence. And we need to comprehend that we are not in full control of our destiny. Perhaps what is required is to simply realize that only God can account for these things and be mindful of our blessings. Fred was loved because to his family and his friends, he was a blessing. And Judaism is anchored in blessings. Instead of rights, Judaism begins with responsibilities. In this spirit, each of us can learn about the character of our lives as Jews by counting our blessings and considering our responsibilities. Let us believe and let us behave as though God has blessed us. And this is Freddie's legacy. May he and all of us continue to be inspired by his passion for life. We thank God for all the blessings which you, Adonai, have bestowed upon us in the form of Ephraim ben Moshe v'Reza Etta. Tehei nafsho tzura b'tzora chaim. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life eternal. At this time, I'd like to ask everyone to please rise the memorial. Tehei menuchato. Ana balarachamim hastirehu b'setek nafecha liolamim. Utzor b'tzor chaim et nishmato, Adonai hu nachlato, v'yanuach b'sholom amishkavo, v'nomar Amen. Before we continue to the Shaarei Tzedek Cemetery for the interment, for the burial service, I just want to make a few announcements. Immediately after the interment has finished, folks are asked to join the family for a Seudat Havra, meal of consolation, which will take place at Temple Shalom on Grant. Shiva will take place at 2222 West Taylor Boulevard, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Visitors are welcome to come between 7 to 9, and the service will take place at 7:30 p.m. At this time, we'd like to ask all the pallbearers to take their positions by the casket as they accompany the Met to the hearse. And then as they make their way out, the family will follow immediately behind. Once the pallbearers and the family have exited the sanctuary, the rest of us get in your car. Careful as you follow along in the procession. Thank you.